Hello and welcome back to the Old School MMA review. Today we are heading back in time to May 17th, 1996 to Detroit, Michigan at the Cobo Arena for the first in a very strange line of UFC events that will change the way things will go from the future here on out. That is right, because here UFC 9 is strictly pass or fail and class is in session. I am the fight nerd, Matthew Kaplitz, here again for Old School MMA review, and joining me on the other side of my screen is our teaching assistant, our TA, or perhaps our visiting professor for another residence, Mr. Zane Simon from BloodyElbow.com. Zane, how's it going today?
So I just want to get this out of the way before we start that I'm not no loser. Just for the record.
That's right. That's because Zane is channeling the spirit of Gary Goodridge, who has superior mind and superior attitude.
And superior elbows.
Damn elbows. Yeah, that pretty much ends our tomfoolery for this week because UFC 9 sucks. Welcome to our hell.
Yeah, this is one of those personal little slices of hell that's nicely carved out of MMA history, which MMA history is full of. Let's not pretend that this is like, oh, that rare MMA event that ends up to be a huge disappointment. No, it's just like, but it's really like the first one. It's the first one to really just be a massive disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, there's been plenty of equally horrible, well, I don't know about equally horrible, just very, very bad UFC events as well, and we're going to, I'm sure, get to them down the line, but here we are at UFC 9, and things are starting to change in some weird and unsavory ways. Man, this is rough. I mean, first off, we are now not having tournaments, at least for this event. For this event, we've gotten rid of the tournament format, and we're just having single bouts, so we have 7 bouts to go through tonight. 6 are on the main card that were on the pay-per-view, and there was a 7th that was a prelim fight, which we will discuss. But otherwise, this is the first UFC not to have a tournament format, and we'll discuss if that worked or not later on. But yeah, I mean, that's really the first major difference, and the other major difference here is that we are now slowly creeping into the dark days of the UFC, saying things are going to go downhill from here pretty quick.
Yeah, it's one of those telling things when they start to, because first thing you noticed, or that I noticed, was in the intro, now you have entirely past fight footage for your intros. You know, it's, the only thing they're showing you when they're bringing you in is now, you know, like they can talk, everyone they talk about, they can show footage of them fighting, more or less, because now everybody's been in the UFC at least once. You know, there are a couple of newcomers on this card, but a lot of the guys they want to talk about, Zane Frazier and Cal Worsham and all these guys, they've all been here before, you know? And you notice immediately watching their clips of all these guys that have been in there before that they're all terrible. They're all terrible fighters. You know, Don Frye aside, but like the clips they're trying to show to build up guys like Worsham and all that, it's rough. And it doesn't portend well for the future of the UFC. That a lot of the guys are starting to. You're starting to see, like, you know, we already know that we've moved on from the martial arts phase. And it's really starting to look like, you know, chubby guys beating each other to pieces.
And unfortunately, that's not really working in our favor in the long term because really, I guess the next year of events, they're not going to be too spectacular. I mean, we are going to get a few good things here and there.
Yeah. You get
Luckily,
some nice views, but
yeah, it's not too much. It's slim pickings for a little while. Luckily, once we get past the next maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 events, we start getting some big names coming back to the show, and we start getting some good fights again. But you know, it's going to be a weird time, and part of that also is because of politically what's happening. And we neglected to mention this in the last episode because that's essentially when this all began. But at this point in history now, the UFC has begun to come under scrutiny. Mostly from Senator John McCain, who's using the UFC to stand on as a soapbox, saying how barbaric it is, and you know, essentially now he's the one who coined the term human cockfighting. So here we are now, where the UFC has begun to get seen as this barbaric, bloodthirsty sport, even more than it was before, because now just a lot more public attention has been brought onto it. And you know, the first problem essentially did happen at UFC 8, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it that much because we were just too busy talking about Don Frye knocking out Paul Ramirez and his fat ass. But you know, here at this event, we now have much more to talk about. You know, UFC 8, there were legal problems with the show and on. Here at UFC 9, the show just barely managed to get on.
yeah.
Yeah, this was a tough one because basically Bob Marowitz and his team of lawyers were essentially in court till about 4:30 that day, of day of the event, that is. So, they were fighting real hard to get this show back on. It took a lot of leeway to make it happen, and unfortunately, one of the things that happened was a rule was basically made that was saying fighters could not use closed fists.
Or headbutts, interestingly, too.
Or headbutts. Originally, they were trying to take away kicks as well. They were trying to take away all the ground stuff as well. Marowitz was able to negotiate them just to basically get rid of closed fists, no headbutts. I think the ground stuff still technically wasn't supposed to happen, but they got away with it for the most part.
Well, they got away with all of it, technically.
Yeah. They did away with all of it.
Except for the main event, they got away with all of it.
Although, to be fair, even in the beginning, we'll talk about it, we'll see it. A lot of the guys actually kind of did their best to adhere to the rules for the beginning, and then they slowly stopped caring.
Yeah, well, I mean, certain guys did. Like, I felt sorry for a few people. You could tell there were a few people who really, like, they got the rules, and they're like, okay, I'm not doing this tonight. And then their opponent would just come in and, like, smash their head into them and start punching them. It's like, yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about the rules when we get up to a certain main event tonight, because this whole event is named UFC 9 Clash of the Titans, and it is to make the rematch between Ken Shamrock and Dan Severn, which, we remember at UFC 6, those two guys fought for the first time. It was a great match. Ended in submission in like 3 minutes or whatever. How could this fight possibly go wrong in the rematch?
It was a lot of fun. But it could go wrong because, well, I think it's because Ken Shamrock's weird, but you can't say that Dan Severn's not just as weird.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in a fight that really where nothing happens, but we're going to get to that probably the next, towards the end of this video. We'll see how long it takes us to get there, because man, oh man, this is just a rough one to get through.
We'll see whichever of us is left alive over the next hour can spend some time talking about it.
Because seriously, I mean, this is like, it's painful to watch this event. I mean, it really was. I got to say, of all the UFCs I've watched so far for this series, this was the one that took me the longest. I had to take breaks. It was just like killer to get through. And it's not that a lot of matches were long necessarily. It was just, my God. I mean, and especially right before the Shamrock Severn match, like I needed to take a good mental break just to stop and just be like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna get through this somehow. Because I had to watch this whole thing last year for my, I guess it was actually my first article in Bloody Elbow when I did the whole history about this fight, Severn Shamrock 2, and that was horrible to watch it back then. But now to watch the whole event, oh my God.
Yeah, it's rough. It's as rough gets. Let's be honest. There's like genocide, cancer, UFC 9.
It's that bad, folks. That is according to Zane Simon. You can send him all the hate mail you want.
That's right. Yeah, you can send me all the hate mail you want at matt@thefightnerd.com.
Zane, you stupid son of a bitch. And you can tweet to Zane at @TheZaneSimon.
That's right.
I don't know if I just made that Twitter up or not. I can't remember.
Well, I'm not telling you whether that's right.
You stupid son of a bitch.
Okay, so do we want to lead off with the prelim here, because I watched that first at least.
I did. I also watched the prelim. The prelim now, by the way, also it's not available on any of the DVD releases. And just to give you guys a heads up, also, there are two versions of this out there. You can watch the current one, which is on the UFC Classic release, or the original VHS tape, which is about 2 hours in length. Or you could be like us and enjoy the suffering by getting the Silver Vision version, which is 3 hours, nearly 3 hours long. There is essentially, I believe, 53 minutes more in the Silver Vision version than there is in the US VHS and DVD release.
Yeah, I didn't write it. I now regret I did not write down the UFC's 1-800 number to order their awesome, sweet T-shirts. But we should totally be putting that out on here to see if we can. We should totally try and call it on the show and see if we can get a sweet T-shirt.
I'm a little afraid to find out what happens if we do call that number. We're going to get some kind of bizarre sex hotline.
Probably. Well, it's a 1-800, so it's not a 1-900 number. So hopefully it wouldn't be phone sex. Although the phone sex companies, I think they do like buy up huge swaths of those toll-free numbers. So if you dial any random one, it's like really likely to be something weird.
So, folks, if you guys want to see Zane Simon and call up one of these random 800 numbers to see if the UFC store still exists, vote in our fan forum today.
That's right.
because I just threw Zane right to the wolves.
Well, it's either that or try and call and get some of those sweet videos. I really need to learn Oleg Taktarov's striking technique.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, too, towards the end, because, man, this one, it was full of filler. It was just an amazing event of matches with a lot of filler. But let's just jump right into things, shall we? Now that we've covered the whole legal aspect of what's happening. And, of course, we did already mention Bruce Beck and his start of the show, because UFC 9 is strictly pass or fail. That was one of Bruce Beck's many wonderful sayings this event, which he also followed up with, Zane, if you caught, often imitated, never equal. Did you catch that one?
Yeah, I did. And he pulled out that old chestnut where techniques are, what was it? It's where martial arts techniques are tried and found wanting, I believe is the phrase.
Something like that, yeah. That's an old favorite of Beck. We've heard him say very similar things in the past. It's a great Beck saying. It's a real good Beckism.
It is. It's a great Beckism. Like let's open the gates. He's trying to make that one stick too. This one had a lot of this one felt like a real testing ground for all the old catchphrases he'd been dragging around behind his truck. It was just like, let's see which of them's still alive at this point and throw them all out there.
This really is the Police Academy 3 of UFC events, then.
Yes, very much. Very much the Police Academy 3 of UFC events.
Now, the reason I believe that Beck actually did say that it was often imitated and never equal is because also at this point in history, we're now getting the knockoffs. We're now starting to have the offshoot promotions in America, one of which would be, I believe, Battlecade had just begun around this time.
Yeah.
Battlecade will potentially cause us some trouble a little bit later in the future, but Battlecade, John Peretti's Battlecade is now, I believe, in session, or if not, it's going to be starting very soon. I believe Monty Cox started his Extreme Fighting Challenge at this point as well. I believe the IFC may have already... No, IFC I don't think was around yet, but we're getting near that. They're another year or two away. But there were other companies now that are starting to pop up. The whole cage fighting craze had really picked up now. Not a lot of talent yet, but things are picking up. So at this point now, the UFC was essentially the NFL of the garbage no-holds-barred leagues. Because we can't really call this mixed martial arts yet. It's still no-holds-barred.
Yeah, it's still MMA cross-training. That's martial arts cross-training. That's what I like. That was that's what Gary Goodridge did.
Him and his Cooksville 1 4-3 black belt.
That's right.
So a few quick numbers. We have in the arena today 10,000 people sitting in there, which basically sold out the arena or close to it. And we have a buy rate of 140,000, which is actually down more than half of what we had at UFC 8. So it's a big drop. I don't really know why. I guess part of it could have been the lack of tournament. It could have been not as many names. But on the other hand, I mean, they were hyping the Severn Shamrock 2 fight to enormous proportions. Even during the pay-per-view itself, they're still hyping it up. Yeah, and you already bought it, so So I don't know why the pay-per-view numbers just dropped so hard, but unfortunately they're not going to do much better for the next few events, and then they'll just disappear completely. But we'll get to that when it happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Was this like the start when they started to lose their pay-per-view carriers? Because that could have been.
This is UFC 8 was actually the first one, I believe, to have trouble, and UFC 9 they officially, I believe, lost Cablevision.
That could be why their pay-per-view dropped so sharply, is because they were losing carriers.
Yeah, it's a drastic drop, and numbers don't get much better.
Yeah. Oh, and if you notice that we've already stopped talking about the prelim bout like we've promised, that's because there's nothing to talk about.
No, there really is not. Our prelim bout brings us the debut of Steve Nailmark. He takes on Ty Bowden, who is, as I wrote down, he is a Michigan native. Well, actually, both these gentlemen are Detroit, Michigan natives. And Ty Bowden here is our master of the hybrid art of war.
Yes.
And they never actually tell us what the acronym stands for in war.
No, I have no idea. But whatever it was, it involved a lot of laying on your back and getting beat up for 5 minutes. And,
7 minutes, actually. It was 7 horrible minutes of watching Ty Bowden lay on his back.
Yeah. So that's for those of you who worry about, you completionists out there who worry that you might have missed something great by missing this fight. It's not so. You can give it a pass.
Yeah, I mean, literally the fight is Nailmark comes in there. Bowden looks completely clueless. Nailmark takes him down, holds him down. That's the fight. He gets a few punches in. He cuts open Bowden. They do a doctor check, and they let him keep going, surprisingly. Nailmark keeps hitting him, makes him bleed some more. They do another doctor's check, and Nailmark looks even more frustrated that he's not over yet, because he's getting tired, he's getting pissed. Luckily, the doctors do stop it on the second time around, And man, this fight was just kind of like an omen of what was to come this night.
Yeah, it was a nice encapsulation of a night of really terrible, terrible fights. Not that many fights, but enough of them were terrible that it really conquered the card.
Yeah, and also something else we should mention here too is that once again there actually is another referee at this event, and that man will be Mr. Joe Hamilton. Now it's not the first time Big John McCarthy has had help refereeing the events. Last time that Big John was in charge, we actually had Timok in the ring with him helping out. This time around we have Joe Hamilton. I don't know how long he's going to stick around, but he's here for the prelims at least, and good for him. You earned a nice little paycheck.
Yep, yep. So now we're getting into like the pre-fight stuff, and one of the first things they mentioned was that we have 2 replacement fighters. First off, I'm like really pumped and B really disappointed because I would much rather watch Mark Schultz fight Gary Goodridge than I would watch Dave Benetau fight Gary Goodridge, but I would much less rather watch Amaury Bitetti fight Don Frye than I would have wanted to see Marco Huas fight Don Frye.
Yeah, there are 2 bizarre last-minute replacements on the show. Mark Schultz coming in for Dave Benetau, who apparently broke his hand, or rather, broke his hand while practicing with Mark Schultz. I guess just either the day before or might have been even the day of. But he basically broke his hand, could not compete. So Mark Schultz, who was training him, came in to be the replacement. And we'll talk about Mark Schultz a bit later. It's actually pretty awesome to get Mark Schultz in the octagon. It's actually a great thing. And then on the other spectrum, we have Marco Huas, who is set to fight Don Frye in what could have been an interesting match. But Marco had to pull out for, I think, an injury. I don't remember what it was. I don't know if they said it. Zane, do you remember if they said it?
They didn't say.
Okay, so some nondescript injury that we don't really know what it is. Huas had to pull out, so instead we have Amaury Bitetti. Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that was. I mean, you think about it now, like Don Frye, pre-crazy, and Marco Huas, really in the brief window that Marco Huas had as a great fighter, and in the UFC, and we missed it. Like, that just didn't happen. And that kind of sucks. That would be a great fight, you know?
Yeah, we'll talk about that definitely a little bit more when we get to that fight. But unfortunately, we're still starting the video. We haven't even mentioned really any of the fights except for the prelims. That's because, again, part of why that's happening is because we both watched the Silver Vision version to compare it to the American version, and there's a good, like, I'm looking at my notes here, there's a good at least 10 minutes of garbage before this pay-per-view even actually starts officially.
Yeah, they pointed out the crappy arena that they're playing at, trying to make a big point of like, yeah, the Pistons used to play here 30 years ago, so you know it's a good arena.
If it's good for the Pistons 30 years ago, it's good for you today.
Yes. And then they had a deathly interview with Dan Severn. That really killed any momentum they might have been building, where he just tried to hype up the fight and ended up killing any interest I had right away. Although his team clapping for him in the background, that was pretty entertaining. That was like the highlight of that interview. After he finished it, his team gave him like a round of applause.
Yeah, we need that to happen on our show. We need like background audience to applaud us whenever we say something awesome, or maybe like a laugh track whenever we say something awesomely funny.
That's right. We totally should get a laugh track going.
I don't know why I don't have one yet. We need to get that. I'm gonna work on that for the next show.
All right, we should totally do that. Maybe do like a Seinfeld intro thing, like the with the bass line coming in for like a second, you know.
And then when your wife runs on behind you from onto the screen, you have like the Kramer music pop on or something.
That's right. Yeah. Then maybe we'll just eventually like make it a TV show instead of a show about MMA, about, you know, like our lives in the big city and your career as a stand-up comedian. And
who's gonna be our lane? We're gonna have to call Crooklyn up to be our lane. We're gonna get Stephanie Daniels here to be our lane from Tap Out Radio.
There we go. That'll work. We've got an idea here. We can make this happen.
Any TV execs out there who want an awesome show, you know who to go to.
That's right.
So after we had the horrible Severn interview, we're not done with horrible interviews because then we go to Ken Shamrock for his horrible interview. And I actually wrote this down because I thought this was very telling of what the future would hold tonight. And when they asked him about Don the Drag Wilson, who's there also, by the way, just I haven't gotten that out of the way yet either. Obviously, Jeff Blatnick's here, Don the Drag Wilson's here, Rich Goins is back again. Who cares? They all suck.
Yeah.
Pre-fight interview with Don the Dragon Wilson. He asked Ken about if a comment I guess he said at a previous event where he said that Dan can be passive sometimes, and Ken responds that Dan can be either passive or aggressive. Said some other garbage along the way. He says, I have my own strategy, and I'm going to stay to that.
Yeah, that was pretty telling. I wrote that down too because it's just such a silly thing to say. It's like, well, he can either be, it's like he can be everything. he can be any kind of fighter. I don't know. But unfortunately, I mean, as silly as it is actually kind of true of Dan Severn that he basically either is tearing people apart or he's not fighting at all.
I think part of that's just his style. It's either if you suck as a fighter in that era, he's going to kill you, and if you're good, he's not going to know what the hell to do. Yeah,
he's just gonna shut down. And well,
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. And Ken Shamrock, man, he could easily be categorized the exact same way. Spoiler alert. Ken Shamrock's legacy is this fight.
Really, that's a harsh comment to say about Ken. Really, this is his legacy right here. Is this schlockfest?
Think about all the Ken Shamrock super fights. This encapsulates them perfectly. As much as I hate to say it, the fact that he never won a UFC tournament, and if I think about all of Ken Shamrock's super fights, they all end up looking like this. There was Shamrock Severn 1 was like this brief moment of glory, but you can't call that like, oh, that's really who Ken Shamrock was in the UFC. No, he was a guy who never quite won the whole thing and who fought to a lot of really terrible, god-awful, boring draws.
It is pretty sad that all these super fights that he had, it was always, for the most part, Oleg Tatarov, Royce Gracie, and now this match here, three of his super fights went the distance, and they were not good matches. Aside from his finish over Dan the first time and a finish over Chemo, essentially his Superfight title, it's not a very good reign.
No, it's really not. And yeah, it's just one of those things where, I mean, it's the reason that Frank Shamrock, even, considering that he didn't, that his actual record and his, MMA, time in the UFC wasn't like way longer. Why Frank Shamrock's often thought of, why Frank Shamrock's often thought of as a lot better a fighter.
Well, Frank is a better fighter, so that's why.
Well, exactly. I mean, if Ken Shamrock had been a better fighter, he would have, finished a few more of these fights.
So I think we've given our viewers at home a real UFC 9 experience here, because it's already been like at least probably 20 minutes. We haven't really talked about anything besides one fight.
Yeah. All right. Well,
we do have more actually, because again, the pay-per-view version and the television version has stuff you're not going to see on the American DVD release, and that's because right before we have our first match, they give us the CompuDrive poll, because the internet exists now. And our CompuDrive poll for this UFC is, this is a pretty great one, should women compete in the UFC?
That was a pretty great question. Especially would have been a great question, like, for this era of the UFC. I can't imagine they would find women who looked way different than their ring card girls. It would be like the weirdest, most awkward freak fights that you can possibly think of. There's no way it would have been done like with good taste or like a great competitive spirit.
Absolutely not. It would have been a complete travesty to the sport. It would have been, for sure, women who were just pulled up the street at best.
Yeah.
We're not going to get any Tara Rosas in this age yet. We're not going to get any Rondas at all. We're not going to get any of that yet. No. We're still a few years away from getting any of those good things. At this point, it would have been just an absolute mud wrestling showdown.
Yeah, it would have been like lady prison fights. It would not have been a good scene.
Would it have sold tickets? Hell yes. But would it be good? No.
So yeah, that is our UFC pre-fight poll question, which leads us to our UFC fight, bout 1, Zane Frazier, our old friend from UFC 1, versus Cal Worsham, both of them making their return to the UFC and proving that they probably shouldn't be there.
And both of them are coming off losses in the UFC as well, because Zane lost his match at UFC 1 against Kevin Rozier, and Cal Worsham just lost his last match to, I believe it was Paul Varlins, back at UFC 6.
One thing they mentioned in this that I totally had missed about Frazier before that was that he was a college basketball player, which makes a ton of sense considering he's like 6'5", and why he also, at least in appearance, looks like a decent athlete.
Yeah, I don't think they mentioned it back at UFC 1, or else I'm sure we would have commented on it. But
yeah, apparently he was a college basketball player, and we now get Kyle Worsham's great pre-fight intro. Did you catch that? Polar bear, beast, or predator, doesn't matter what animal you put in, I'm taking them out.
Cal Worsham is a regular zookeeper of the UFC.
That's right.
He should be in that movie with Kevin James when they do the sequel.
And for no reason other than I can figure out, other than that fans were getting in early on the ground with their dislike of black fighters, Cal Worsham was a big fan favorite here. He was getting a lot of cheers, and Zane Frazier was getting booed out for no reasons I could tell at all. I can't think of any reason that fans would have been familiar enough with either of these fighters to boo or cheer them.
Yeah, I don't know what that was about either. I guess they just chose Worsham because he looked better, maybe? Yeah, that's my only theory, is because he just looked bigger and scarier, technically, because he just had more muscle mass. That's my only theory on that, really.
Maybe it's because he was a Marine, too, so maybe he's getting some Army love.
I figured that could be it, too. That might be a possibility. That makes sense. Who knows? Either way, the match sucked. But before we go into that, I'm not going to cut to the chase here. I'm just going to go bam. This is it. But yeah, before we go into how bad this match was, we should mention that in between here, I believe Cal Worsham was actually supposed to be in one of the previous events. He was actually supposed to be in the Ultimate, but he was out of it due to an injury, and I believe Dave Bentow was on and replaced him. And Zane Frazier, in the meantime, actually went over to Japan and did a Shuto match, which he won, I believe. Won by knockout, and then he had this fight, I think. And after that, he continued to fight overseas in various places, where he proceeded to lose his next 6 fights in a row.
Yes. I give Zane Frazier a small amount of admiration for actually continuing to fight, as most guys who competed at UFC 1 and those first handful of UFCs pretty much stopped after that. So he gets a small amount of credit for keeping on going, but his overall career record of 4-11 shows that he never really bared a lot of fruit as a fighter.
No, but he really cashed in on the whole UFC thing, so he was able to go into K1 as well with this on his record. So, it definitely helped him out for at least a little while, made him some extra cash. But Zane Frazier, unfortunately, will not go down in history books as one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah. So we want to talk about this fight, which sucked.
Do we really want to talk about this fight, Zane? Are you sure about that?
Okay, I don't really want to talk about this fight. What I want to talk about is John McCarthy. I don't really care about the fight. Because this was instantly my point of feeling really bad for the fighters, because obviously I felt like Frazier obviously listened to and understood what all the special rules were and tried to follow them. It even looked like he was trying not to close his hands when he punched. He's just kind of swatting out there. And Worsham just took him down and started headbutting him immediately on the ground while John McCarthy screamed at him, "No headbutts! No headbutts! No, that's 1, 2." And he just kept counting at him and screaming at him while he did it over and over again until they stopped the fight.
Yeah, that was pretty great because, like I said, there were supposed to be no closed fists, no headbutts, and nobody cared because everybody did it anyway for the most part. I mean, this fight, I guess they were trying a little bit to be a little more sensitive to the rules because Cal, instead of throwing punches to the face as much, he would just do to the body or he'd throw elbows because technically he could still elbow guy. That wasn't against the rules.
Yeah.
But yeah, important Big John. I mean, this would be the hardest he'd work the entire night, quite frankly, because after this fight, he'd just give up on even saying anything.
Yeah, he chimed in a few times with some weird random stuff, but
Yeah, not nearly as severe as this fight, where he was like keeping track of them. It's like, that's three. Like, okay, three. What? Like, you're gonna get fined 3 times? I don't even know what the point of that was, because he's hitting him a lot more than 3 times.
Yeah, he hit him with like 20 headbutts, and he counted 3 of them. It was just a mess right off the bat. It was a mess, and I gotta say I feel bad for Frazier because it looked like he really was trying not to, do anything at all. But Worsham obviously was just on autopilot. And then he had that great post-fight thing where he talked about being twice the athlete that Chemo is, and that he wanted a Insta title shot. And
That's right, yeah. Because at this point, this was now, again, by the way, this is, I believe, not in the American version or not in the current released version. I think this is only in the silver version still. All the post-fight interviews, I think, were cut from the current version. And Worsham afterwards, he's like saying, his next goal is to get the Superfight title because they gave one to Chemo. Why not to him?
Yeah, and I got to say, Worsham is like maybe twice the tactician and technical fighter that Chemo was, but he's half the athlete.
He definitely looks like half the athlete.
Yes. And after this match, we got a Brazilian promo.
Yeah, again, another feature that's not on the American release. We got a feature titled "The Boys from Brazil."
Yep. And which was a video review of all the Brazilians to fight in the UFC, and is probably one of the only places that you can find footage of Eldo Dias Xavier fighting.
So he was the capoeira guy from UFC 2, right?
Yep. And they showed him doing some front flips and back flips, and then briefly getting his ass handed to him by the karate guy, the Shojin Ryu. Was it? Yeah. What's his name? I can't remember now. Damn it. The guy who he developed the UFC belt, and I'm totally blanking on him.
Dojo McKarate Pants.
Yes, Dojo McKarate Pants. Black guy, specialized in shooting in longbow archery and karate.
Just for anybody out there who actually does care about the first fight, by the way, it ended at about 3-14. Worsham wins by, I think, eventually
headbutts
and Frazier quitting.
Frazier quitting, yeah.
And that's the fight. There's nothing else that happened. It was a 3-minute long bout. Anyway, Boys from Brazil. Yeah, again, another feature we didn't get to see. Yeah, just killer, time killer, and filler.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad little thing, but it was definitely filler.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if I wouldn't say it's not a bad little thing, considering
it was terrible, but it was.
It was the most ill-titled thing of all time that they've done in the UFC. I mean, really, you're going to call the Brazil, you're going to reference Nazis hiding in South America to the Gracie family.
Yes, that's true. That was in poor taste.
Keep it classy, SEG. Keep it classy.
Keep it classy, yeah. And that brings us to bout 2 with an unheralded boy from Brazil. Because that whole thing was really to build up Bitetti. That's that whole build-up was for. And then we immediately get a totally different Brazilian in Corino, or Sereno.
I believe it was Corino. To be fair, Don the Drag Wilson would say Sarino, and then Blatnick would say Carino. So I'm just going to go with Corino. That sounds better to me. No relation to Steve Corino, the hardcore legend in ECW.
Yeah, no relation to him, and he fought a guy who is so passed over that I didn't even write his name down.
Matt Anderson.
Matt Anderson, who looks like the Birdman from the NBA, Chris Anderson, but fought is probably what it's got to be a guy who is, even among the hardcore MMA circles, I don't think anybody's looking up Matt Anderson.
Well, funny enough, I mean, I guess we'll talk about this at the end of the fight. I actually got some information on both these gentlemen here. Matt actually had a pretty long career after this fight. You would be shocked to know he actually continued to fight after this, but we'll get to that in a second because, at this point in time, Matt Anderson has his second-degree black belt in warrior training, no relation to War from earlier. And, yeah, we have our BJJ brown belt at the time, Corino. I guess really the novelty of this fight is that Corino is 6'8", and Anderson is 6'2".
Yeah, and they're the same height, which is the real novelty there.
Or close up to the same height, I believe. I think they had Anderson listed as 6'2", but so still, either way, he would have been the tallest guy there had it not been for Corino, who's nearly 6'8".
But he's not 6'8". You see him in there; he's like 6'3" or maybe 4 with platform shoes on. He's definitely not 6'8".
Yeah, he's still pretty darn tall. I mean, well, I do have a point of reference for his size, but we'll have to take a look at that later, I guess. But by the way, it's two giants battling in the octagon, and again, it's just another not much to watch of a fight.
Yeah, the big notable thing here is really that this is interestingly enough, this is I would say the first Nova União win in UFC history. So, one of the biggest camps in Brazil now, this is their first UFC win because Corino is a Nova União brown belt and still an instructor for them.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't done with MMA, like we said. I mean, in the end, he did end up winning this fight. And just to give you guys a little bit more analysis, they don't all climb down our throats and hate us for dissing all these fights. But really, there wasn't much to say about this one either. I mean, for the most part, Corino got a very easy takedown, stayed in the guard. Anderson just survived as much as he could. I think the only thing of interest for Anderson was that he almost used a sort of rubber guard to keep Corino down from attacking him as much. But unfortunately, it was easily mitigated when Corino just basically did a one-handed rape choke on Anderson, just do that, lean up and punch him in the face, and that was essentially the most of the match.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. It was. I found it interesting too to know that, like, I mean, seeing these guys, they're both like 22, 23, and it really made me realize right at that moment that at this point for the UFC is really like a place for guys in their 30s. Like, there's not really a lot of potential for a young fighter to come in and be like this great long-term UFC guy. They didn't have the money to keep people around. The fights didn't happen frequently enough to really build something up. It's for guys who have been kicking around in other sports for a long time and and want to do something and show off how good they are. It's really not like there was no real place for young guys to like, oh, he's gonna really develop fighting 300-pound 6'6", bar brawlers over the next decade.
Yeah, surprisingly, most of the stars still at this point really are older guys. There's really no young guys. At this point, UFC wasn't really even thinking, I guess, that far ahead. They were just kind of trying to get whoever would stick around for longer, and that was, in this case, these older guys who needed the money.
Yeah, because they tried to tease out that, like, oh, these guys are so young, they're going to be great forever, and you think about it, watching it now, and you're like, there's no way watching this at this point with what they had, that they could think of keeping anybody around for 5 years or something to develop.
So that brings us basically to the close of that fight, because again, it wasn't much to talk about. We're basically spending more time talking about people in their 30s rather than the fight.
Yeah, and the only other thing to note was, once again, with the post-fight stuff, and I was surprised they even mentioned it, that Andre Pederneiras was there too. As I say, this is the start. You see very early Nova União in the UFC. Andre Pederneiras on hand, and that's like really the big takeaway from this fight. But you had some stuff on Matt Anderson and his career longevity.
I have actually some things on both gentlemen in this fight, and just for the record keepers, this one here, this fight ended at a TKO at about 5.5 minutes. Big John McCarthy stops it due to a cut on Anderson's face. That was all she wrote. Good night, Irene, etc., whatever. Like I said, it was not a great match. It was barely even a good match. It was barely a match to begin with. But like I said, both these guys, they did have a career after this. None of them will be in the UFC ever again. But Corino did continue to sporadically fight throughout his career. He fought again in 1997, and then he fought again in 2003, and then he fought final time in 2005. And oddly enough, his last fight was actually against Antonio Bigfoot Silva at Cage Rage 12.
Yeah, he kicked around for a while. Like I say, I mean, he's still a BJJ competitor. He's still
unfortunately, his MMA record is going to be only 2-1-1. And his last fight was that loss to Bigfoot, but
no shame.
He's still coaching.
Yeah, no shame in losing to Bigfoot. I mean, That was when he lost when Bigfoot was in cage rage. That was when people were talking about him as like, well, they were talking about him as a future top 5 heavyweight. And look, guess what? He is. You know, he was future top 5 heavyweight.
And he also looks pretty damn close to Bigfoot's height.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But Bigfoot's 6'4".
Is he? I thought he was 6'8" for some reason. I always confuse the tall guys.
No, Bigfoot's he didn't get that tall with his gigantism. He's more just like built wide, you know, as they say, a brick shithouse.
I think Zane Simon just called out Bigfoot.
That's right. No. Please, Bigfoot, wherever you are, do not come find me.
If you do want to find him, you can tweet him at the Zane Simon on Twitter.
Yeah, you can come find me in New York.
Wait a minute. No, you can't.
I'll be adding my address to the post when this comes up.
The show's over. Go home, everybody. Show's canceled. Yeah, and back to also to Anderson. Matt Anderson actually continued to fight for a very long time. He kept fighting until 2010, believe it or not. He would never make it back to the big show, and he ended up getting a record of 13 wins, 8 losses, and 1 draw. So he kept fighting until about 2010. He has had some big losses against guys like Alan Goes, Travis Fulton, and Pat Miletich. Actually, is the guy who he lost to following this fight. So yeah, he fought a few big names here and there, mostly a lot of local nobodies, but he did fight a few well-known dudes who weren't quite as well-known at the time. And you know, he did improve a lot in his skills. This fight here, not so much, but he kept going, and he had himself a nice little career in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, from these early days, if you go on and fight 20 times in your career from this first, like, if you're in the first 15 or 20 UFC events, and you then have a career that includes 20 professional fights, you've done quite well for yourself.
Yeah, so hats off to both these guys, because even though they didn't really look that great in this UFC debut for both of them, they both went on to have very good careers in the sport, one way or another.
Yep. And that brings us to our third fight, which includes one guy who fought for way too long and one guy who did not fight long enough. Gary Goodridge versus Mark Schultz.
Yeah, and this is one of the highlights of this show also, in some ways.
In some ways. If you have to watch this show, for some reason, you're just like, oh, I have it, I should see it. This is one of the 2 fights on it that you should actually spend any amount of time watching.
There is a good amount to be learned from this fight because, again, we have Mark Schultz, who came in as a very, very, almost literal last-minute replacement for Dave Benetow, taking on Gary Goodridge, who, you know, coming off his being a runner-up at UFC 8, looked great at UFC 8, and unfortunately here he's going to get tooled.
Yeah, this is, like I say, UFC 8 was really like some false advertising for Gary Goodridge. He came off as like this amazing powerhouse of a fighter who could conquer anyone and was always going to be one of the toughest guys out there. And then this fight quickly showed that he had a long journeyman career ahead of him.
But to be fair, he's gone up against one of the most credentialed real athletes. I guess you want to call, at this point, I'm going to call him a real athlete because a lot of these guys just aren't in the UFC. He's going against one of the most credentialed guys the UFC has ever seen, bar none, to this day. He's up there with the best of the best that has competed in the UFC. We're talking about a 2-time Olympian, gold medalist. He has won damn near as many championships as you could think of. He actually was a Guinness World Record holder as a wrestler with the most wins most title wins in the U.S. This guy is the real deal. He's one of the top wrestlers in the world at this point in time. And funny enough, he'd actually been retired for like 8 years. So that's the other funny part of the story is that he's coming out of retirement on practically a day's notice to fight in the UFC. Probably no striking training. He does have some BJJ under Pedro Sauer, so he did know how to do some jiu-jitsu. But overall, I mean, this guy is just pure athlete, highest caliber athlete. You know, he's the kind of guy that can take a UFC fight on a half-day notice, and he's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, they taught him he'd been training BJJ. He'd been training at whatever camp Dave Benetow was a part of up in Canada. Whatever camp that was, because I know Benetow trained with a lot of wrestlers up there, including Schultz. But
that was Camp Candy, led by John Candy, Canada's most famous export.
That's right. And so, I mean, he'd been training. He'd been sort of, you know, become an MMA or a wrestling coach for MMA fighters already. But yeah, there's no, there's no short selling. He definitely, stepping in on a day's notice and taking on Gary Goodridge at this point in Goodridge's career it'd be a huge feat even if he didn't win. Even if he'd just been competitive, that'd be a big deal. But he came out and he dominated.
Yeah, absolute 100% domination. I mean, at first, Schultz was clearly a little out of his league in terms of striking because he looked incredibly awkward and uncomfortable striking. And that's why, basically, after 30 seconds he was like, forget this. Shot him for a takedown, and oh my god. I mean, that takedown was just best we've seen.
Yeah, he hit a big power double, got on top of Goodridge, and, dropped some great, actually a lot of great body shots on him that the commentary was kind of shitting all over. They were like, oh, he's hitting him with these weak little arm punches. He can't do any damage with those. And, I mean, he was winding up and punching, really punching Gary Goodridge in the gut over and over and over again. And you could see when they finally zoomed in on Goodridge after, like, a couple of minutes of it, Goodridge, he looked like he had blood coming out of his mouth and coming out of his ear, and he was in a real bad way. I mean, he took a bad beating.
Yeah, I mean, every punch that Schultz threw was with power and with intent to finish. Because really, I guess he just didn't know enough how to actually finish the dude off, but it didn't matter. It's
yeah.
He just held on to the dude for so long. I mean, he just looked great the whole time.
Yeah, eventually they stood him up because he didn't know how to finish. And
yeah, questionable stand-up in my opinion, but I guess to be fair, he wasn't doing anything because it was at the 6-minute mark of him just mounting Goodridge. So understandable. He wasn't in a dominant position, but he wasn't doing a damn thing with it. So I guess I can understand why they got him off their feet again.
Yeah, and that gave us another awesome takedown.
It did. I think we only got like 3 takedowns total in this fight, but my God, they were so great to look at.
Yeah, that was where he did that like sit-through one where he went down on one knee and propped up and with like a single or a double leg and twisted him down. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, and again, Goodridge escaped because he was now at this point bleeding so badly the doctor stopped to take a look at it.
Yep.
And they let it continue, which was surprising, I think, to the commentators at the time. And it wasn't as bad as a cut as it looked. It was a lot of blood coming out of the wound, but it wasn't a horrible place for the cut, so they let it keep going. And again, that gave us now time for our third takedown of the fight, which was, again, just, I think, probably the best of them all, really.
Yeah, it was gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. I mean, he just powered him down, and that's what made it worth it. That was the fun part. You got to see these 3 great takedowns, and it was total domination.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, this one ended after 12 minutes due to doctor stoppage, I believe it was, because at this point,
it went to the full time, and then McCarthy called it off at the end of the time, at the end of the first round, because they had like a second 3-minute, 2-minute round planned. So it was like one 12-minute round and one 2-minute round, I think, was the structure.
Something bizarre like that, yeah. We didn't really mention that over the rules because not much has changed besides what we mentioned with the whole, allegedly no punching or headbutt rule. But they did add a sort of round thing here. So for the normal non-main event fights, they all had a 12-minute time limit with one. I think it was either 2-minute or 3-minute overtime. Didn't matter. We never saw it. And then Superfight had some special rules also, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, I mean, it was bizarre structure that will change in due time. But for now, really weird. And Goodridge was really saved by the stoppage because man, he was a mess. Yeah, he got beat up really bad. Schultz gave him a good pounding, and McCarthy was smart to just wave it off at the end of the second round, or at the end of the first round, and just say, "Nah, we don't need to keep doing this. There's not going to be anything better out of it." Yeah, that gave us a great Blatnick flip up. Did you hear that? What did Blatnick say this time?
A cameraman went in to take pictures because he thought the fight had ended. And Blatnick yells out, "Who is in the octagon?" Yeah, I remember he said the octagon. Like, what? Where did that come from? So we got a new. a new playing surface, which I actually wish the UFC kept, the Roctagon.
I think there actually is a company that is called the Octagon or Octagon or something like that. That I think they're in the Midwest or something. But I think they're an amateur league, like literally amateur MMA, not just amateur. Like they're not good, but I think they're mostly amateur MMA. Yeah, they were smart. They probably watched UFC 9. They heard Blatnick and they said, "My God, that's a brilliant idea. I want a Octagon in my backyard."
That's right. And so the Roctagon was born. And that also gave us a chance for Blatnick to totally misuse irony. When he gave his post-fight interview to Mark Schultz and mentioned how ironic it was that he was training Benetau and that now Benetau was in his corner.
Yeah, it's not entirely ironic. It's more just a turn of events that's not ironic in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a totally predictable turn of events in which a training partner of yours gets injured and you step in to fill in for him and he then helps train you.
Yeah, irony would have been if Goodridge had gotten injured and Schultz had to replace Goodridge, and so Schultz fought Benetau. That would have been ironic, to at least a better degree than what Blatnick was claiming was ironic.
Yes. Oh, irony. He started the trend that would allow Mike Goldberg to misuse the word ironic for the next 10 years of UFC events.
Yeah, so we do have a few post-fight interviews, which, again, I don't believe are on the current release of this event, or at least the older American release. I'm pretty sure not on the new one either. We have 2 post-fight interviews, and before we have them, we actually do have a noticeable thing. I caught this in the crowd. I don't know, Zane, if you noticed this, but in the crowd, right as soon as Schultz is like walking out of the cage, we actually get a good shot of Eddie Goldman of No Holds Barred. It's his radio podcast, and he was, one of the earliest guys to be covering the sport. And we get a really great shot of Eddie Goldman just hanging out, and like literally, he's got his microphone in his hand, waiting for Schultz to come out. Schultz just finished fighting. He's already got his microphone out, trying to interview him.
I did not. I missed Eddie Goldman. I'm not as familiar with him on site as you are. Apparently, I missed him in the crowd.
He's got his signature Midwood Wrestling shirt on. It's hard not to miss Eddie Goldman.
I'll have to watch out for. I'll have to give it another watch. No, I won't. I'm not watching it again.
That's your shout out, Eddie. So yeah, we have now our two post fight interviews with Mark Schultz and Gary Goodridge. And Schultz, it's unfortunate because like we were saying, he would have been great to have back in the octagon, and unfortunately he's not. And he even says, he's thinking about it. Like, he basically said, if the money's right, he'll do it. And I guess the money just wasn't ever right for him.
Yeah, I'm sure I think he very foreshadowingly, was more like not even if the money's right, but if they can pay me enough, was more like I know how much I'm getting paid for this, and it'll have to be a lot more than what they're paying me right now. And I think he was trying to say that they don't pay him enough to get out there and do it, and that he was fine. It was a fun thing to take on short notice, but he had no designs on doing it again.
Which kind of brings up the question as to what were these guys paid, because this is the first time it's not a tournament format. The tournament format had a pretty easy pay structure. You knew what you were going to get when you came in there. But now that we have these single matches, I have no idea what these guys were getting paid, if they're all being paid equally or if some are being paid more than others. I assume Superfight got paid more, but in terms of these exhibition bouts before it, I don't know what these dudes are making.
I gotta think that guys who'd been there before were getting paid more, but there's no real way to tell. I'm sure he made extra money for stepping in on the same day. I can't imagine that he just took Benetau's purse as is. I'm sure that he got them to offer him some extra cash up front.
Yeah, and that's pretty much our fight with Gary Goodridge and Mark Schultz. And we didn't really get a chance to mention either, but Mark was basically fighting in honor of his recently deceased at that point brother Dave, which is one of the biggest tragedies in U.S. wrestling history. And UFC kind of milked it a little bit also, a little tastelessly at some points, I think.
Yeah, they mentioned it when he was walking in along with his Olympic accolades, like, and his brother was murdered. And that felt a little weird. It's only 3 months removed at this point, so it was just a weird. I guess one of those things that it would be hard not to mention it with it having happened so near to it. but it didn't. As a byline for his intro, it just felt kind of strange. And we also, speaking of just pushing one thing out for another, though, we also got the return of Gary Goodridge in his post-fight interview doing his superior shtick thing. Did you notice that? This is the second event now where he's talked about all the superior assets that he's had, but the one that he didn't have that caused him to lose the fight.
Yes, he's got superior mind and superior attitude. He was missing his other superior tenant.
Yeah, and this time it was superior weightlifting.
Yeah, of all the things, superior weightlifting is apparently part of his many tenets of superiority. I don't know what we're going to call this Goodridge isn't here.
And so he felt that it was weightlifting that made it so that he couldn't beat the Olympic gold medal wrestler out there. Didn't do enough weightlifting to overcome the wrestling chops of Mark Schultz. If only if he'd hit the squats a few more times, he would have had him.
Yeah. Yeah, if he hit a few more hack squats or something. But yeah, I mean, like I said, unfortunately, that's the end of Schultz in the UFC. Really sad because he could have gone far if he wanted to. But at this point, he already accomplished so much more. I mean, UFC meant nothing to him.
No, it was a fun thing for him to do once, and I'm sure they paid him well for it. But I couldn't. Yeah, the money was not. There wasn't enough money in the sport to get a guy like him long term.
And now continuing our trend of things that are not on the current UFC DVD release, the Silver Vision release has a few more bits of things we didn't get to see in the which includes another ad for Dan Severn and Shamrock 2, because you already bought the pay-per-view and you need to get hyped up more for it.
That's right. And what I found was interesting was maybe, for one of the first times, is that they're already selling tickets for the next event.
They did that last time, I think, also. No, actually, no, they didn't sell tickets last time. They kind of mentioned it, but this time they are already hyping up UFC 10, and they do announce it's going to be called the tournament because it's another 8-man tournament.
Yes. They mid-event, they were already realizing that non-tournaments were not something they wanted to do. Which, I mean, I don't know. What did you... So like, as we're getting towards... we're like at sort of the halfway point. But what are your thoughts on the whole tournament non-tournament card?
Well, I think this is a bad example. I mean, and the way they started the show too was they even kind of said it's an experiment. So they're trying to see how it worked, and I think it worked eventually. But we're still a few years from it working. That's really the best because obviously this is the format that they now are using obviously for full-time UFC. They've been using it for years. At this point in history, the tournament was probably a better idea. And they did the way they weaned off the tournaments was something that we'll talk about as we go on in the next few shows. It was a good way to wean it off, and it worked out for the best in the long run. It just took a while for it to be completely killed off, but I think single bouts idea works when you have the right people, and right now there's not enough right people. Yeah,
I mean, because that was part of what I was saying too. With the UFC at this point, it's not the right place for a young fighter. It's not the right place. You can't. There's no development plan here at all, and so when you're only really getting guys in their mid to late 30s or occasionally early 30s, it's like, oh my God, Don Frye is 32, what a prospect. When you're getting guys at that point, it's way better to be running a tournament format where you're just getting them out there and getting them fights and showing them as much as you can before they go off within the next year or two.
Yeah, just too soon. Basically, what it was, it's just too soon for that to happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So other way though, we're getting our first ad for UFC 10, and we're also getting our first ad for the UFC Secrets of the Octagon instructional tapes. That's right, it's back again.
Yeah, and we need to get our hands on these tapes because I'm telling you, I really need to up my ankle lock defense.
Well, I will say this. I was looking around, and I know they are out there. It looks like the price for the full set has actually not gone up much from what it originally cost. Because originally they were saying you could buy each tape at $60 a pop or all 5 for $200, and I've seen it for about $250 to $300. So it hasn't gone up much. And I mean, we'll make this offer. If anyone wants to donate, I think we need to do a Kickstarter officially. We need to do a Kickstarter.
That's right. We should do a Kickstarter for the UFC tapes. I mean, I just can't imagine they didn't have a warehouse of these things sitting around somewhere,
Yeah, I'm gonna have to ask around because we need those tapes. We need those tapes, and if anybody has them, if anybody knows how to get them, tell us. Contact us. We don't want to spend $300 in these tapes, so tell us how to get it for free in a
No.
legal way. In a legal way, Zane, in a legal way, yeah.
Legal way. Legal way.
That
Totally
was
legal
close.
way. Donations. Back of a truck. Back of a legal truck.
Full of legal pads and legal paper and then legal notes.
That's right. Legal only. Nothing shady. Wink.
No, absolutely not. We need those tapes. Zane's winking, by the way, but he's doing it off screen.
Wink. Wink.
It's hard not to steal people's thunder when you're on Google Hangout because if you just make a noise, you just take away their entire screen.
It's true. Google Hangouts, I like the switchy thing, but anyway. So, moving on to the fourth bout of the evening.
Well, one last thing to talk about. I want to get out of the way real quick. We need to stop discussing all these things during the way, but really, this is the problem what we had to watch. We had to sit through this 3-hour UFC 9 show. You need to hear about it, fuckers. So we had to sit through
our 3-hour Old School MMA review.
Yeah. We're going to make this a 5-hour long episode just to show you how much we hated having to watch this. This is horrible. So, yeah, before we have our fourth match, because, by the way, we're at the halfway point of the show, and my God, it's been painful as hell. We're at the halfway point. We have another promo, this time for, believe it or not, a Pancrase event.
Yes.
Yeah, because SDG and Pancrase apparently joined up forces, and there's going to be a Pancrase pay-per-view for the first time in America, which was part of the Pancrase Truth Tour, and it was set for January 14th, 1996. Now, according to my records, also known as Wikipedia, there was actually no live Pancrase event on June 14th, so chances are if that was, it was probably either a mishmash of several of the previous Pancrase Truth events, because there were already 5 Pancrase Truth shows up to that point in June 14th. So it was either going to be a mishmash of those 5, or it might have been the 5th event itself, which had Boss Rutan fighting Frank Shamrock and Guy Mezger taking on Minoru Suzuki. Actually had a few really good matches on these events, but we have no idea what it was. If anybody can tell us what this American pay-per-view was, please do. But that's what was happening. Pancrase is awesome. We like it. Maybe we'll review it more one day.
Yeah.
Let's move on, because, my God. God, this UFC not.
Moving on, and we get the UFC's... They called him the first sumo competitor in the UFC because they have no respect for facts. But the UFC's second sumo competitor, with Koji Kitao fighting Mark Hall in a fight that it would have made so much more sense in their last event, and they even mentioned that it would have, and just is comically weird.
Yeah, we have 190-pound Mark Hall taking on 350-pound Koji Kitao. I think that you're referencing, obviously, Emmanuel Yarbrough, right, as our first sumo?
No. I'm mentioning Taylor Tooley.
Oh, yes, Tyler Tooley. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, no, because Yarbrough, as you've heard me harp on before, was not an actual sumo wrestler.
Yes, that's right. He was an American amateur sumo and never actually pro. The difference here, though, is Kitao is actually Yokozuna, or was Yokozuna. Yeah. So he's actually our highest-ranking sumo ever to compete in the UFC.
Well, he's the highest-ranking sumo possible to compete in the UFC. I mean, you can't get higher ranked than Yokozuna.
So that's in general, as far as the UFC as a whole, it's never had anyone this high as a sumo in it. But sumo, Yokozuna is the highest rank, and this is our highest-ranking guy we're ever going to see. Because we're not going to see. Let's be honest here. I don't think we're seeing another sumo ever again in the UFC. This is our final hurrah for sumos.
Yeah. Well, unless you have some weird Lyoto Machida fetish where you just can't stop mentioning his sumo background. But they weirdly, or the funny thing to me was that they talked about, Kitao, practically unheard of for sumos, he decided to leave the ranks of sumo early and try his hand at other skills. Not mentioning at all that he was pretty much kicked out of the professional sumo ranks for being basically the worst Yokozuna ever.
Yeah, Koji Kitao has had an odd history. I'll talk a little more about that, I guess, after we get through the fight. He has had a troubled past in the world of combat sports.
Yeah. So he got the boot from sumo wrestling and decided to try and try his hand at MMA. And quite frankly, this event was tailor-made for him because it had no closed-fisted strikes and no headbutts. And, they tried to limit ground grappling. So if he was ever going to get a great shot at MMA, this was it.
And unfortunately, shit didn't go down good at all.
No, it really didn't.
So Koji Kitao, highest-ranking sumo, and like we mentioned, he's had not a very savory history in the combat sports. And I'll bring your attention right now to basically what happened a little bit more after he got out of the sumo career, because he went then into the pro wrestling career, which is not the first time we've seen a sumo, or actually, in this case, I guess it is the first time we've seen it in the UFC of a sumo going into pro wrestling. Won't be the last. We'll see it later on as well. But yeah, Koji Kitao ended up going over with Tenryu, and he started a team with him over there. Made a pretty decent name for himself. Got up there pretty quick because, again, he was capitalizing on his sumo credibility. Probably his most notable time in those early days of pro wrestling was in SWS when he wrestled against John Tenta, also known in the WWF as Earthquake. And what ended up happening was they had a shoot fight, essentially, in the ring. For whatever reason it happened.
Yeah.
I lost my spot.
Why did it happen? Earthquake, shoot fight?
Okay. All right, I'm back to my rambling diatribe. Here we go. For whatever reason that was going on in this match, Kitao and Earthquake just were not selling for each other. They were refusing to actually play by the pro wrestling kayfabe rules, and ended up just having them have a shoot fight. Like, at one point, Koji tries to go for a leg. He starts doing low kicks to Tenta. They both actually start threatening each other with eye gouges, and Kitao really does try to eye gouge Tenta for, again, who knows why. And this match just went on and on. There was an eventual ref bump, and it's hard to tell if that ref bump was actually legit or if it was part of the kayfabe in this match. But it ended up being that the match was called to an end. And, just bizarre match. In the end, though, Kitao then went into MMA eventually. He headed to the UFC, where he did not do too well. And then he got back into pro wrestling, where he actually had a long-time career as rather involved in training other wrestlers and a few more matches. Never really held too many titles in the world of Japanese pro wrestling, but he was there for a long time, very involved in it. And really, I guess his biggest fame is probably more, I think, pro wrestling than it is sumo, at least to more modern fans. But yeah, that's our Koji Kitao story. Not much really to say about him other than he's just a strange dude.
Yeah. I honestly, I will say I haven't watched that many of them, but there are a few things as thrilling as watching a pro wrestling match turn into a shoot.
Yeah, it's when things go horribly wrong, and this is one of those matches where it really is pretty fun to watch, because it gets really tense, because Tenta is a big, scary dude also. Earthquake is enormous. He's called Earthquake for a reason, and Kitao is also pretty friggin' huge. So when these guys go in and threaten to shoot on each other, I mean, it's kind of scary. It's pretty tense in there.
Yeah, it's weird because at that point you're not going to be watching a pro fight. You're going to be watching basically a street fight in front of a huge crowd of people.
We do like street fights.
We do. So yeah, this fight was what, a minute long?
About 47. Well, the official time I think is listed at like 40 seconds, but it actually went like 47 or something. But yeah, it was under a minute long either way.
Yeah. And it looked like it was going to be a lot of fun from the beginning. It looked like it was going to be a ridiculous shit show of fun, with Kitao immediately bum rushing Mark Hall, pushing him up against the fence, and throwing a couple wild strikes, and and he even got him down. He was going to lay on him, and it was going to be this weird, smothering, total crap show. And then it was over.
Yeah, at some point, Koji Kitao's nose exploded violently in a pool of blood. And it's hard to say what happened because the camera angles didn't pick it up. We assume, or Mark Hall takes credit for it. He says he landed a right hand to his nose, but
they showed it later. After the fight, like 5 minutes after the fight ended, they showed a clip of it, and you could see that Mark Hall, with like barely the end of his hand, like a pinky, clipped Kitao's nose right on the tip and just snapped it. And that was it.
Yeah, it didn't take much, I guess. And it's unfortunate because it was actually starting off to be pretty interesting. Then all of a sudden, the fight just ends, and his nose just destroyed.
Yeah. And he just... Credit to John McCarthy for pulling him up quickly and bringing him over to the corner, and he was waving his hand like, no, I'm done. That was it.
Yeah, and then that leads us to our most awkward post-fight interview of the night.
Yeah, where Mark Hall decides that he needs to really tell all the kids out there that there are plenty of professional avenues for fighting out there, and you should only ever fight in the ring. Never solve your problems with violence.
Yeah, I wrote down the exact quote, in fact, because during the post-fight interview, for some reason, I have no idea why, just out of nowhere, Mark Hall goes, I gotta say something to the kids out there, because he's all beat up and insane at the moment. And he says, fighting has many consequences. He actually fumbles and says consequences. I don't know, but whatever. He's tired. He just fought. He fought for 40 seconds. He's tired.
Yeah, he just broke a man's nose. Give him a little credit.
Yeah, it's very traumatizing. He says fighting has many consequences, mentally and physically, and legally. He forgets about that part too. Towards the end, he's like, wait, we're having trouble now. Legally, if you're gonna fight, do it in a ring. That's all he says.
Yeah.
Now, let's not forget also, he starts his post-fight interview by proposing to his girlfriend Laura.
Yes, an in-ring marriage proposal.
Without the woman near him at all.
Yeah, nowhere around to say yes or no, which I gotta say, I actually think is pretty smart. If I was gonna propose marriage to somebody in a public place, I'd probably want to do it where they couldn't actually respond.
Yeah, so, I mean, well, who knows what she said. We'll never know of what actually happened that night, but he proposes to his girlfriend who's not even there, so that's something for your trivia, is who was the first person to propose in the octagon. It's Mark Hall.
Yeah. Also a good, a fun and telling moment of, so Mark Hall, as we've said, when he's not coaching his daughter's softball league on the weekends, he's a black belt in Muay Do. And if you want a great sign of the legitimacy of Muay Do, his 10-year-old son is a second-degree black belt in Muay Do, they tell you on air. Nothing says legitimate martial art like a 10-year-old who has a second-degree black belt in it.
Yeah, I think we need to go to that school, wherever that is.
It's true. I'll take my Kuksul Wan skills. So yeah, and this is now where we get some more filler.
Oh my God, yes, we have even more filler because it doesn't ever end. UFC 9, seriously, if you guys do watch it, you're lucky. If you're not watching the Silver Vision version and you're watching whatever's released now, it's not gonna have any of this stuff because man, they just overloaded this stuff with. Okay, so here's the worst part about this filler, folks. You actually get a bonus fight, but it's not the prelims. No, it's UFC 1, Pat Smith vs. Ken Shamrock. They now are continuing to hype up the fight with Ken and Severn, the rematch, by showing an older fight of Ken defeating Pat Smith. I'm not just talking the fight. I mean, they show the entrance. They show the ring announcements. Like, they show the whole 9 yards because they have time to kill, apparently, in their minds.
Yeah, it was bad. It was not. Like, it's not a bad fight, but still, it's just, of all the things to show, I mean, show Ken Shamrock Dan Severn 1. Why not that?
Which I'm surprised they didn't, because I figured with all this hype, and it's only a 3-minute fight, I mean, they might as well have.
Yeah. And then we also, after they showed that, we now get questions with Jeff Blatnick and Don the Dragon Wilson.
Oh, man. As we established at UFC 8, the internet exists now, and they're doing their part to have chat rooms and have interactivity with the fans. To be fair, UFC was ahead of themselves. They were ahead of the times by doing this. But, yeah, it's the early UFC days, so these questions are absolute garbage.
Yeah. We got one person asking if we got one person trying to get gym advice out of Jeff Blatnick, which he immediately passes on and just says, choose whatever gym has somebody you like in it, basically. And then but interestingly, we got Don the Dragon Wilson there being asked if he would have fought in the UFC in his prime, and he teases that he's going to try and fight in the UFC as soon as possible.
Yeah, that was a surprise to me, because I'd never heard of that before. I mean, if I ever meet this dude, I'm going to have to ask him what's up with that, because, yeah, he apparently was in negotiations to do the UFC, to fight in the UFC at some point, and he said that Blatnick was going to help him train with his wrestling, and he claimed that he actually said that Severn and Shamrock were going to help him, apparently also with the grappling part of it. I don't know how he was going to get both those guys to work together, but I assume they wouldn't have. By the way, I mean, imagine if he actually got that team together. I mean, would Don Frye, Don Frye, would we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's the next match, and that's really the only match worth talking about this whole show. Would Don the Dragon Wilson have been the best fighter in the UFC ever if he had actually fought and trained with all those dudes?
Maybe if he'd done it like 10 years earlier, sure. At the time, I can't think so, no. I mean, there's only so much time you can put into anything. It would have been a fun sideshow, though. Would have been awesome to see him like come back and like fight Hoist or something.
Just don't forget, I mean, he is the Night Hunter. He can do anything.
That's true. He is the Night Hunter. I forget, maybe if they could get him to fight one of those vampire women who hold the cards, then they could. That'd be a pretty good fight.
Yeah, I mean, luckily we've asked this question way before, so we even were anticipating this brilliant remark from Don Wilson. So yeah, we're not gonna even ask the question again on how he would do. We basically just answered it right here. But yeah, I mean, Don Wilson, the UFC, never happened. Move on.
Yeah, never happened. Yeah. Teased it. I think it makes it even more obvious how much money problems they were having at the moment, where you've got like your announcer saying, "I'm trying to fight in here," and it never happens.
Yeah, that was probably his way of on-air negotiating, and I guess either way, it never worked out because Don Drag Wilson never fought MMA at all.
Yeah.
Probably for the best because he is pretty old.
Yeah. And now we get our fifth fight, our best fight, the one fight in this whole card, really, really, really worth seeing. Amaury Bitetti versus Don Frye. And the first thing you will immediately notice as this starts out is that Amaury Bitetti is tiny.
Yeah, that's even saying a lot compared to Don Frye. That's not to say Don Frye is tiny either, but no. Don Frye is not the most biggest guy out there.
They listed Don Frye as 6'2" there. A quick search online shows that he's actually somewhere closer to 6'1", and I wouldn't even be surprised if that was closer to 6 foot. And Bitetti was a lot smaller than him. Bitetti was a natural featherweight, pretty much, fighting Don Frye at UFC 9.
Magnum UFC, as Bruce Beck calls Don Frye.
Fighting Magnum UFC, and as Don Frye says, there can be only one. Please don't sue us, Highlander franchise.
Yeah, that was a great quote during his pre-fight interview. Like out of nowhere, he must have just seen Highlander, but man, it just fits so well with how Don Frye delivered it too.
I know. He just was like with that gravelly like, there can be only one.
That's the best part too. Is like at this point, like he's not as gravelly yet. I don't know what happened in the next 10 years to make him all gravel sounding, but here he sounds a little bit more normal. But even then, it still just sounds so good. It just sounds right to come out of him. That's what it is.
It sounds right, and I mean we're really like that. I think that's like the first window into Don Frye crazy land, because like at the last event he seemed totally sane. He seemed like the nicest, sanest. Like, oh, I'm gonna go back and see my kids, and oh, it was a great fight, and I loved fighting, and that was great. And he's still pretty much like that for this event, but then you got that there can be only one. And then, it's like this small window into a whole maelstrom of Don Frye crazy land.
Did you catch Amaury's record?
I did, 150-1.
So, we thought we were out of the land of crazy mixed up false records, but nope, no, we're not.
Yeah, Bitetti really. I wish that he himself had announced. I wish they'd given him more promo lines because his accent was hilarious.
Yeah, we're not gonna get too many great ones like that for a long time either, unfortunately.
Yeah, he had a super, super thick Brazilian accent that was absolutely remarkably hilarious.
Unintentionally remarkably hilarious.
Yes.
So, fight itself. This is actually like the fight of the night.
Yeah. Yeah, the first thing you notice right at the beginning is that if Don Frye hadn't grabbed the fence so much, it would have been a much different fight.
Yeah, there's a lot of clinching, and Amaury almost had a takedown at some point.
He almost had like 3 of them, but Frye got on a hold of the fence every single time and was bigger and stronger enough that just that little bit of extra leverage was all he needed to totally keep himself upright. And then on the feet, obviously Frye was way more powerful when it came to striking. The moment he got some separation, he just started cracking Bitetti over and over again. And this fight got ugly pretty fast.
Yeah, again, this was definitely a more dominant fight than what we saw from Mark Schultz earlier. The difference being here is that instead of just controlling him, Don Frye was not only controlling him, but just battering Bitetti.
Yeah. I was just... Oh, I think McCarthy... Yeah, McCarthy once again here started... He was yelling about some sort of violation that Frye had. I think he must have been headbutting him some. But he was yelling violation over and over again.
Yeah, Big John's really getting excited for this match. It's like, violations, I can say something finally.
Yeah. And then, the elbows on the ground. I mean, he landed one where he basically spiked the back of Bitetti's head with an elbow.
Yeah, I caught that one. I'm surprised that wasn't illegal. I mean, because it is, but I'm surprised no one called it.
Yeah, it just, like, it was the kind of thing, if that happened to any fighter now, that fight would be over. The fighter would be holding his head, screaming, and the bout would be immediately called off, and he'd be disqualified. No problem.
My favorite part of this fight was when Don Frye was first going all out pride rules on Amaury. He had him in like the front headlock on the ground and started dropping knees right to the top of his head. That was like, I marked out. I was like, oh yes, yeah. It's pride.
Oh yeah, and not even dropping him, but when he cage walked to drop knees, to like post his legs up, and like he was just, or he posted his legs up to put the pressure on him, and then he started just dropping brutal knees. It was bad.
Yeah, this was as dominant of a beatdown victory as you could possibly have.
Yeah. And then...
You can imagine Don Frye wins by TKO at, I think, 9.5 minutes, just beating down for Amaury.
Yeah. As Blatnick said, Frye took a brief blow in the middle of the fight. But, I've lost you.
I'm still here.
Okay, I got you. Frozen. Anyway, so Frye took a brief blow in the middle of the fight, but post-blow, he continued beating Bitetti senseless until Big John mercifully just called it. And said, okay, it's over.
Yeah, poor Bitetti was just a mess by the end of it, and it was just... He couldn't do much, unfortunately. He just had nothing. He had no answer to anything Don Frye was doing for the most part. I mean, in the beginning, it looked like it was going to be competitive, but then it just turned into just Don Frye beatdown. Yeah,
and it's a size thing. I mean, eventually, if you're that much smaller than somebody and they can grab the cage and keep you from taking them down, and you expend all that energy, I mean, he's just going to be done sooner or later.
And as this fight wraps up, Rich Goins comes out onto the mic and says that this is one of the greatest victories in UFC history.
Yes, and it was a shitload of fun, but it was kind of a mauling. I mean...
Yeah, I guess this is Goins' idea of trying to get the audience alive again after what they just had to sit through.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely trying to smooth over to that idea of like watching a man get his head kneed into the canvas at full force is like, no, it's awesome. I mean, it is awesome, but like, for anybody who might think we're a total blood sport, it's totally sporting and like one of the most incredible exhibitions of sporting prowess you've ever seen, folks.
Yeah, and that brings us now to our post-fight interview as well, which has us having Don Frye saying that he wants a Gracie at the next UFC event.
Yeah, this is once again where like the inability to get somebody like Hickson or something like that would have been really awesome. Because the Gracie, getting Hoist versus Don Frye, I would not have taken Hoist at this point against this Don Frye. Not even a little.
Yeah, it would have been a horrible match either way, but at least Hoist was would have had some history. But yeah, at this point, like we said in the past, the Gracies have nothing to do with the UFC at all anymore. Like they're totally done with it. That's not going to stop people from calling them out.
Yeah. Yeah, it was unfortunate that I'm sure they didn't want to lose that mystique of, oh, the Gracies are still right there. They're right there to step in and fight. Any event coming up, you could see Hoist back in the ring, but they were obviously gone.
Yeah. So after our rambly interview with Don Frye, we then get yet another ad for UFC merchandise.
Yeah.
And then we have our UFC ad hyping up Severn some more. Man, just more filler that, again, you guys probably won't see in your versions of this, but, man, just filler.
Yeah, I want one of those UFC trailer trash T-shirts. The, huge, oversized, really poorly cut white T-shirt with a UFC splash graphic on it.
I want the hat that just says Ultimate on it.
We totally need Ultimate hats for this show.
So anybody out there who hooks up with some of this old school gear, they need to do that immediately.
Yes.
It's for the better of the show. It's for the sake of making the show better. This is our PBS fundraiser right here, folks. We need your UFC merchandise to keep making these shows happen.
That's right. Or at the very least, we might just need to start taking better advantage of your green screen back there.
Yeah, I might have to start doing that. Take some of the crap down and actually green screen all these old UFC things behind me.
Yeah. Put a few posters up, a T-shirt. But yeah, and we also got Don Frye's rambly post-fight interview, him talking about how his brother used to beat him up, and that's why he's such a good fighter. And
which is oddly enough the same story as Chris Weidman.
Yeah, same story as Chris Weidman and Matt Hughes.
Yeah, so bullying, it's good for the world. Think about it.
And so after all this filler, which includes big promos again for both Severn and Shamrock, we finally get our super fight.
And my God, it took forever to get here. It's only been, technically on the main card show, 5 fights to lead up to this, but my God, what a long, harrowing journey it's been to get here.
Yeah, it's been 2 hours for those 5 fights. And with an hour left to go, you can guess where that all ends up.
Filler. Let's add more filler to the show.
Yes. Filler and one of the worst spectacles to ever grace the MMA landscape.
Yeah, I'm happy you didn't just call it a fight. I would have been disappointed if you called it a fight.
Yeah. And we get what is now going to be my constant catchphrase for all things. I'm at rest and I'm at peace, but later tonight it'll be time to release the beast.
Yeah, Dan Severn gives us another charisma-filled promo where he says exactly what Zane just did. Just imagine a thicker mustache, and that's Dan Severn.
That's right, except I need to heighten and wind my voice up a little more. So I'm at rest and I'm at peace, but later tonight it'll be time to release the beast.
Wow, you just sapped all the charisma out of yourself. That was great. How did you do that? How did you channel Dan Severn so expertly?
Years of training. It's my time at the inside the actor's studio. It's my time at the actor's studio.
I need to learn your process, but we'll save that for another episode of the show, I think. But man, yeah. Still, I mean, the fight's supposed to start, and now we're getting more promo vids. We have their entrances to sit through as well. These take forever. We have Ken's entrance also, which is pretty great because someone tries to actually attack him in the crowd. It looks like someone just randomly grabs him and and Ken just has to yank him away. They try to rip his robe off as he's walking to the ring.
Yeah, and man, usually I take a bunch of notes for fights and things like this. I have nothing.
There's nothing to talk about with this fight. This is the hardest part of the show now, is we ramble all the time trying to add. We basically have been adding filler to this show to get us to this point now because we have nothing to say about this fight. There's nothing to talk about.
No. Dan Severn walks in a circle. Ken Shamrock stands in the middle of the octagon and watches him walk in a circle. And that's really it.
I mean, my first ever article for Bloody Elbow, as I mentioned earlier, was actually about this fight, and I do have some insight on it, which I'm going to put up all the links to all this stuff also. Man, the story for this fight, as we mentioned earlier, because of all the legal problems that were happening, Ken and Dan were technically not supposed to be throwing closed fists. So, I've actually interviewed Ken. I've interviewed Dan Severn about this. I've interviewed also Bob Meyerowitz, the owner of the UFC at the time, and I also quoted Big John McCarthy from his autobiography about this fight, because everybody essentially has different views of what actually happened that night. And, Ken basically says that he decided he was not going to throw closed fists, partly because he said it's part of the rules. I don't want to break rules. I don't want to be a bad example. Bob Meyerowitz says that Ken threw a fit and demanded more money to take the fight, which apparently he gave him more money. I believe that's what he said. I'm just trying to remember all the things he said to me in that interview. And Dan also was, similarly unhappy about that, but, he went with it. The difference being that Dan asked him, well, are you guys going to fine us? And he said yes. And ultimately no one ever enforced those fines, so Dan opted to use closed fists. Ken chose to do the open hand strikes. And to be quite fair, none of that mattered. None of that really contributed to how bad this fight was. It didn't matter that they weren't legally allowed to throw headbutts or closed fists. None of that mattered. Because even if Ken hadn't done that, even if Ken had used closed fists, it wouldn't have mattered because he didn't use them to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, and two, they didn't at like the last 3 minutes of this 30-minute fight, they grappled. Dan, Severn took Shamrock down and really actually put a good beating on him. Not like good enough to make this whole thing worthwhile and not make me want to commit ritual seppuku, but
what doesn't really?
Yeah, but certainly good enough to win the fight. And you can't blame a lack of close-fisted strikes and headbutts for the fact that they didn't even wrestle or grapple or do anything, kick. Although they're probably both wearing shoes, they couldn't even kick. Ugh.
I think had actually Ken not worn the shoes and he had kicked, because he would have kicked, no doubt he would have kicked.
Yeah.
I think he definitely would have clearly won this fight just because of his kicking. And also potentially sped things up, and maybe Dan was going to try a leg attack, because basically, as we said earlier, they both had game plans. They were both going to stick to it. What those game plans were, no one's really sure of to this day, but from my understanding, they were both planning a similar strategy of counterattacking.
Yeah. They both just
wanted to be the ones to aggress. They were going to wait for the other guy to be the aggressive one. And we did see a little bit of that shine through when Severn shot for that ankle kick at one point. That was pretty much it for our aggression of the night, was that, and Ken mounting Dan for about 4 minutes. And really though, I don't know what the plan was. It was just a mess, and nothing would have made it better, because they both were sticking to their plan so hardcore that we'll never really know what could have happened.
Yeah, and interestingly, did you? So I wrote down what I think I heard, but maybe you took more time with it. But when the fight ended, the first round, ended, and they went on to the bonus time. In between, Ken Shamrock is talking to John McCarthy, and I believe he says, "Don't let him do this to me," because I believe that Severn, when Severn took him down, he started throwing a few actual punches. And as we already said, Ken was really pissed. He was like, "I'm going to obey the rules and not break the rules." And so I think he was referring to the fact that he felt like Severn was breaking the rules by throwing close-fisted strikes.
Yeah, by all accounts, to this day, Ken stands by what he said, and that he was going to follow the rules, even if other people weren't. And I guess he was expecting John to actually enforce those rules for real, which he wasn't. Yeah. So that was to his own detriment. But again, even that really wasn't a big deal.
No.
And regardless, they were both fined for inactivity. I believe during the match, they were both fined anyway. So The closed fists, again, weren't the big deal. They were both getting fined for inactivity. That was the issue, not the inability to punch.
Yeah, I mean, well, because it's just like, well, what so you say, you're gonna stick by the rules. You're not gonna punch. You're not gonna headbutt. What were you gonna do? It had to be. And the thing is that we've seen Ken Shamrock's other super fights. This is how he fights. This is Ken Shamrock in a super fight.
It's unfortunate. He basically had that big win over Severn back at UFC 6, and that's been it. Because UFC 5, it was 30 minutes of nothing. UFC 7 against Oleg, it was nothing. Yep. UFC 8 against Chemo. Again, Chemo is just not a good fighter at this point, so it was an easy win. But yeah, for the most part, anybody who's just been good, for whatever reason, Ken has just been. I mean, maybe it's just he's being too respectful and not willing to engage as much, or maybe it's just who knows. There's a lot of factors that it could be, but ultimately Ken is more of a counter fighter in these UFC fights, and hasn't really worked out to his advantage. And Severn also similar style, and it doesn't have an ability to finish either. So, it worked great the first time because Severn was aggressive. This time around, he's not going to be aggressive. We've got 30 minutes of nothing happening.
Yeah. And then the card is over. So I wrote down Severn wins and calls out Hoist. Bleh.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I have also. We got ourselves post-fight interviews as well. I don't really have much written down about that other than Severn saying he connected to the face 3 times. Yeah,
that was weird. Severn's post-fight interview was so weird and calm and nerdy and just so I don't know. I will say this: he obviously thinks a lot about fighting while he's fighting.
That's why he's not actually fighting. He's just too busy thinking about it.
Yeah. But I was this our first utterance of styles make fights?
This may have. It's definitely one of the earliest. I don't know if it's our very first, but it might be. I'm not going to check that. I'm not going to sit through all 8 UFCs again to figure this out, but it's definitely one of the first.
Because that's what I noticed immediately to try and excuse how bad it was. The first thing offered up was styles make fights,
which pretty much sums up the UFC as a whole anyway. So who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, there's not much to say. I guess if you guys want to know more, like I mentioned, I'm gonna put the links up to Bloody Elbow as the post I wrote about this because I've got the whole story and I've also got the interviews on my YouTube channel with both Ken and with Dan Severn, so you could hear in full their thoughts on this topic. They both have a lot to say about it, that's for sure. And they only have so much time in this show, so
yeah.
Really, I guess my question right now, Zane, is do you agree with the winner of this fight? Do you agree that Severn was the man that won this fight?
Oh yeah, I think you basically had nothing. Shamrock and Mount doing nothing, and then Severn on top, hitting Shamrock at least hard enough to cut him and bust him up a little. And that's it. That's your one bit of action. The only bit of scoreable action in that whole fight is Severn on top landing a few punches.
Yeah, this is the part that kind of has always bothered me to this day about this fight is who actually won this fight because it depends how you're scoring it also, because the scoring here can be subjective, and that's who would you say? Basically, it sounds like you're saying the damage is worth more than who's controlling the fight, and unfortunately, it's really hard to gauge any of this in this fight. But to be fair, I think on the standing, it was not quite equal. I think Severn edged him out slightly more standing, but I think when it did come to the ground, because Shamrock was in control of him for 4 minutes on the mount, it didn't matter. He was at least doing some minimal ground and pound. At least he was doing something. He still controlled him for 4 minutes on the ground. Severn only had him for, I think it was about 30 seconds, right?
Something like maybe a minute.
It was very short, and Ken was able to get out of Vasa, but regardless, he was in the guard, not in as dominant of a position doing that.
Yes.
So, this is the case of do you weigh damage more important than you do controlling the fight? And if you consider who's controlling it, I would have to give it to Ken, because technically he was the guy in the middle of the octagon for the most part of the fight, and he did hold Mount for the longest. He held it for 4 minutes, whereas Severn just had that 30-second time, in the guard where he did do a lot of damage. But again, it was only 30 seconds, and It's hard to really weigh this out, in my opinion. Really, it's a tough
I just don't like. I don't like scoring position personally. I'm much more of a damage, damage, strikes landed, that kind of thing.
We have to take into consideration also that Severn was not able to really get out of that for 4 minutes either. So he's controlling it. Ken's not necessarily finishing, but on the other hand, also Dan's not trying to get out, and Dan's not able to get up.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I say, I think that if you are scoring for position, then there's a real argument to be made for Shamrock. But personally, I still say, well, if you've got him in this dominant position, then you should actually probably be doing a lot more damage.
Yeah, which is, again, tough to say why. I mean, I know Ken has mentioned that the weight difference was so big, he had a hard time really doing as much with him this fight. But then again, he had the same weight difference the last time they fought also. So, it's tough to say. I'm still to this day a little mixed on who actually won this fight, in my opinion. It's, sometimes I watch it and I think Severn won because he did more damage, but other times I'll see it and I'll think that Ken won because he technically had more control of the fight.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand why Ken didn't think that he could. I don't understand why Ken didn't ever seem to think that he had a submission advantage over anyone in the UFC after his first UFC win.
Yeah, at this point, really, the only guys he had that ability over was guys like Chemo, who weren't as good.
Yeah. Just like a guy like Severn, who's got almost zero submission and submission escape ability, and you're not going after him,
Yeah, and so that's pretty much our UFC 9. It is. I think we can say it's the worst show we've seen in the UFC so far.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. There's 2 high points in the whole thing, and it's Frye versus Bitetti, and it's Goodridge versus Schultz. But otherwise, it's all pretty much entirely missable.
Yeah, I mean, if we really break this down, I mean, our prelim fight, not worth watching at all.
No.
Our card opener, 2 losers from older UFC events, not worth it either. Not a great fight. I actually like Cal Worsham in this era, but this was not a good Cal Worsham fight.
Yeah.
Matt Anderson, Rafael Carino, not good at all.
Not good
Schultz
at all.
and Goodridge is watchable only to see Schultz's takedowns. So you're basically watching a 12-minute match to see 3 takedowns.
Yep.
We have Koji, Kitao, Mark Hall, 40 seconds of nothing.
Yeah, 40. I mean, it's interesting. Like it's a letdown. That's a letdown, is what that is. Other fights are just bad. That fight's a letdown because you're like, okay, we're done. Nothing.
Yeah, and then like I said, Frye Bitetti is really the fight of the night. And even that, it's still a beatdown either way. It's a very, very one-sided fight. It's more fun to watch because at least they're both doing stuff.
Yeah, Bitetti comes out really strong, comes out hard, looks great early on, and then gets the piss kicked out of him for another 12 minutes or so. Yeah.
And then our final match, Severn Shamrock 2. I mean, Zane, is this the worst fight in UFC history? Can we say that?
I will say this, because Shamrock actually had mount, and because Dan Severn was able to, reverse him and get on top of him and hit him a bit for a few seconds, it may be slightly better than Shamrock Taktarov or Shamrock. No, it's better than. I would say it's maybe slightly better than Shamrock Gracie. Maybe. I don't know.
Shamrock Gracie's pretty bad too, though, because we sat through that one also not too long ago, and that was basically half an hour of Ken inside Hoist's guard with nothing happening.
With absolutely nothing happening. No change at all.
I mean, I was trying to think of some other stinkers too, and even the worst stinkers I can think of aren't as necessarily horrible, or they're horrible in different ways. Like I was thinking way back to not even way back. I'm even thinking Lyoto Machida versus Shogun 1. Remember that one? A lot of fans had a hard time getting to that one. It's not funny though, because the stuff actually happens there. So it's actually on a technical standpoint, it's actually a good fight. It's watchable. It's not exciting.
You got to be talking bad fights. You're talking like Krylov versus Palele, or Houston Alexander versus Kimbo Slice.
Yeah, that's pretty horrible. Also, but thankfully it's mercifully short. Is the one
Yeah.
thing it's got is that it's a shorter fight compared to this. That was a pretty horrible fight. I was actually
Well,
even thinking of long forgotten Jeff Munson versus Tim Sylvia for when Munson fought for the UFC title.
ooh, yeah.
That was a pretty horrible one too.
Did you see the Singapore card just recently?
I'm happy to say I did not, and I don't know if I want to yet.
It was a fun card. I'm not gonna say it was bad. It was mostly fun. But Dave Galera versus Royston Wee is the worst UFC fight of the last half decade.
Wow, that's it's a pretty big statement there.
Royston Wee is now he's 3-0 in his MMA career. He could not make the cut for Tough China, which featured a yoga instructor who had never sparred before in his life. And Dave Galera was 5-0 on the regional circuit in the Philippines and was worse than Royston Wee
Wow, that's saying a lot right there.
by a sizable margin. It was bad. It was what?
Can we put this dud up there too with like Caleb Starnes versus Nate Quarry?
Yeah, that's fair. Like I say, it was the worst fight I think it's the worst UFC fight in the last 5 years. Palele Krylov was a bad one too, but that was just sort of a heavyweight gas fest.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of duds, and oddly enough, Ken Shamrock seems to be in a lot of them for some reason.
Yeah,
But, you know.
early UFC duds are really largely Ken Shamrock. Another good one would have been probably Oleg Taktarov versus Marco Huas.
That was a pretty awful one also, but luckily again that wasn't as long as this. But that doesn't really matter. That was if really nothing happened at all either.
Yeah.
We had some kicks at least, so there were some kicking happening.
There were some kicks. I think really it's Shamrock Hoist or Shamrock Severn. They're both right up there.
I think that's going to be our poll question for the this episode then over on BloodyElbow.com is Severn versus Shamrock 2 truly the worst fight in UFC history? And you guys can comment, let us know if you think it is or if it wasn't, or if you have any suggestions of what you think was the worst fight in UFC history. But I'm pretty sure this one's got to at least be up in your top 5 of worst fights of all time. Not even just in UFC history. I'm talking about all time. I mean,
It's bad.
I mean, luckily we haven't gotten over to the Pride 1 yet, but we'll get there soon enough, I think. But man, this was rough.
This was rough.
As a whole, this event was a stinking, horrible pile of feces. This was just not good. And it's unfortunate because they were experimenting with the whole single bout, attempt.
But it's too early. Like I said, this is the UFC era where all the fighters you want to watch are going to be guys in their mid-30s who have been competing in other martial arts for years and years and years and are coming into the UFC to face off. You don't want some 23-year-old kid who's just getting his combat sports career started because there's no room for growth. There's nothing, it's just like you're either going to throw him through tournaments or you're going to match him up at random with guys that like Matt Anderson, who you've never seen and you're never going to see again.
Unfortunately, no. And speaking of, I guess we should say a few goodbyes also, since this event has a few, but actually not that many, not as many as you would think.
Yeah, well, we got Corino and Anderson, and we have Bitetti, I believe. This was Bitetti's only UFC fight, I believe. Maybe not. Am I wrong on that now?
I think Bitetti is done. I believe he's done. And Mark Schultz is done also, unfortunately. Yeah. He's gone far too soon. Surprisingly, I believe that we actually haven't seen the last of Zane Frazier, I think. No,
Bitetti is not done, in fact.
Okay, let's do that again, because I was trying to remember. I knew one of the dudes was back. I couldn't remember which one. Let's try that again. Go ahead.
Right, let's check on... Okay, so this is the last time that we see... this is the last time that we see Corino and Anderson, and I believe this is the last time we see Frazier. And
Saying goodbye to Mark Schultz, and we're saying our farewell to Koji Kitao as well.
Yeah, Mark Schultz and Koji Kitao. And I do not believe this is the last time we see Bowden or Nelmark.
Yeah, Nelmark will be back in a very famous moment.
Yeah. And yeah, the rest of these guys we will see again. We will see Bitetti again, and he will, of course, famously go on to start one of the larger fight organizations in Brazil down the line. But yeah, those are our goodbyes for UFC 9.
Well, I have some good news, Zane. There actually is one amazingly great goodbye that I want to make you aware of, and all of our fans as well. We're saying at least a temporary farewell to Rich Goins.
Ah, gone, cut down in his prime.
Well, he's gone, but only for a little while, I think. But then he'll be gone for long term. But at least at our next event, we do have a new ring announcer, and man, I can't wait to get to the next event as a whole. Just not even that's just a pretty great reason alone to get to the next event. But UFC 10 coming up next. The tournament format is back because the show is named the tournament. We're going to get the introduction of a man that's going to actually start to really change how MMA looks. Or this one, no holds barred, still it's what it's called. But you know, with the introduction of the hammer, you could say that the hammer is about to drop on the UFC. Huh? See what I did there?
There you go. Not our first hammer in the UFC, though. I believe he is the third hammer to grace the octagon. Can you name the first two?
Oh man, I remember that there was another hammer, but I couldn't remember there are two. Who are they?
They actually fought each other. No, wait, they didn't fight each other. But there are two hammers previous. Andy Anderson was the hammer, and Mark Coleman made his debut against Modi the Hammer Hornstein.
Ah, so we do have several hammers. And it's funny that you mentioned Andy Anderson because hey, we got another Andy Anderson mention in this week.
Yeah.
I was trying to avoid it because the only time he actually appeared in this event was in a flashback when they showed UFC 6, they showed I think UFC 6 with Dan Severn or whoever it was. They showed a flashback to when the first fight with Severn and Shamrock, and there was Andy Anderson in the background.
Yeah, I'll try and fit one in every month if I can.
Also, WMAC Masters.
That's all right. WMAC Masters.
Man, UFC 9, this event sucked, and I hope that everybody that sat through it enjoyed it, because we had to sit through this friggin' thing, and oh my god, it was terrible, and that's why you're getting like nearly 2 hours of filler as well in this review.
That's right.
And just to round things out, by the way, the event isn't over yet if you have the original Silver Vision version, because we still have 2 more ads. They do another ad for the instructional tape series, we get another merchandise ad, and then we go back to our web poll at the beginning of the evening, which was, should women be in the UFC? And guess what? 87% said yes to that.
Damn. They were more progressive then than they were like a decade later.
Pretty nuts, yeah. So that is how our show ends, is with them saying, yes, women should be in the UFC. And we finally get our credits after a merciful near 3 hours of the Ultimate Fighting Championship number 9.
That's right.
And man, this event just sucked.
Yes. And to keep us from just saying that on repeat for the next half hour.
Zane, this event sucked. Are you aware of how much it sucked?
I've got nothing, Matt.
This event sucked.